It's my pleasure to invite you to this talk by Dr. David Suzuki. And David, thank you so much for agreeing to deliver this talk. And like David does not need any introduction, but I will say a few words to introduce David. David is, I think, the globally well-known naturalist and committed for well-being of the planet. David is a scientist, is a broadcaster, is an author, and a co-founder of David Suzuki's Foundation. He is a companion to the Order of Canada and recipient of many awards, including a recipient of the UNESCO Kalinga Prize Award for Science, the United Nations Environmental Program Medal, and also 2009 Right Livelihood Award, and UNEP Global 500. David is also a Professor Emeritus at UBC, and David has received 29 honorary degrees from different universities from all around the world. The people in Canada particularly, or North America, know him for familiar to television audiences as a host of CBC's Science and Natural History series, and also The Nature of Things, which I hope most of you might have watched. He is also known for radio audiences as the original host of the CBC Radio's Quirks and Quarks program, as well as the series of Matter of Survival and From Naked Ape to Superspecies. In 1990, he co-founded with Dr. Tara Cullis the David Suzuki Foundation, which we all know, and they have their office in Toronto, and they are also the partners in this conference. The foundation is focused to conserve our environment and find solutions that will create a sustainable Canada through science-based research, education, and policy work. He has written work includes more than 55 books, 19 of them are for children. He lives with his wife and family in Vancouver, and David has agreed to deliver this talk from distance just to save some carbon footprint. So David, it's all yours, the stage is yours, and thank you again for accepting this invitation.
Thank you very much. I'm glad you kept your remarks short. That seemed pretty long to me. I'm absolutely delighted to be able to address you from the comfort of the University of British Columbia, so I don't have to get in a plane and fly all the way out there to see you. So far, all I see are empty seats in the room. So, oh, there you are. Okay. So thank you for joining me. I just want to start off by saying we are at a moment without any precedent in the 4.5 billion years that planet Earth has existed. In the 3.9 billion years since life evolved on Earth, there has never been a single species in the position that we're at today. We have taken over every continent on the planet. We are now the most numerous mammal on Earth, and we are so powerful now that basically we are the major factor altering the physical, chemical, and biological properties of the planet. That's why scientists have now called this brief period since the 1940s on the Anthropocene epoch, a period in geological history when we have become the dominant force shaping, as I said, the physical, chemical, and biological properties of the planet. That power of our species has come about by the sudden conjunction of a number of factors. The first, of course, is population. I was born in 1936. When I was born, there were just over 2 billion people in the world. We're well on our way to 8 billion people in just a couple of years. I mean, can you imagine the population of the planet has quadrupled within a single lifetime? That's unbelievable. If you were to map the population of Earth, starting from our appearance 150,000 years ago, the curve basically is flat until the last pencil width of time in which we're shooting right off the page. And every new mouth added to the planet has to be fed, clothed, and sheltered. So the sum total of all of humanity today is a massive ecological footprint. It takes a lot of air, water, and land just to keep us alive. But of course, we're not any biological creature like a rabbit or a rat or a mouse. We've suddenly acquired this incredible technological muscle power that is used on our behalf to explore virtually every part of the planet, even asteroids in outer space and the moon, all in search of opportunities or resources. Our technology has amplified our ecological footprint many, many times above what we require just as an animal. And ever since we emerged out of the Great Depression of the 1930s and out of World War II, we've developed a very great appetite for consumption. Indeed, our consumption has been built into the economy as an important part of keeping the economy going. So 70% of the North American economy now is based on consumption. Now, my mom and dad were married during the Great Depression, and because of that tough time, they banged into our heads, my sisters and me. They told us over and over again, save some for tomorrow, live within your means, share, don't be greedy, help your neighbor, you may one day need their help. You have to work hard for the necessities in life, but you don't run after money or new things as if having more stuff makes you a better, more important person. Those were lessons that we acquired from the Great Depression. But today, in a time when consumption is built into the economy as a critical part of our economy, those ideas that came out of the Depression seem so quaint and irrelevant today. And all of the things that we consume comes out of the earth. We use them up, and when we throw them away, they go back into the earth. And that, again, our consumptive habit amplifies our ecological footprint just sky high. And we have a global economy that serves our consumptive demand. So when you add those factors together, our numbers, our technological muscle power, our consumptive demand, and a global economy, we have become a force like no other species that has ever existed. We are in the Anthropocene epoch, a time when we're the dominant force on Earth. The problem is we have become very powerful, but we don't know enough to use our power in a way that doesn't undermine the very things that keep us alive: the air, the water, the soil, and the diversity of plants and animals around the world. And so we are undermining the very life support of the planet. Let me show you how it happens. When Paul Mueller in Switzerland, working for Geigy in the 1930s, discovered that DDT kills insects, everybody thought, what a great idea. Now we can control the great pest that had plagued humankind since the beginning of agriculture. And so we began to spray DDT around the world. Paul Miller won a Nobel Prize for his discovery in 1948. But by the early 1950s, people began to say, what happened to the birds? The birds seem to be disappearing, especially the eagles. And scientists tracked it down and discovered a phenomenon called biomagnification. That is, you spray at low concentrations, that molecule is absorbed by microorganisms, they're eaten by higher organisms, and at each level up the food chain, you concentrate it. So by the time you get to the breasts of women or the shell glands of birds, you've concentrated DDT hundreds of thousands of times. By the 1950s in North America, breast milk of women was considered too toxic to feed to babies. How could we have managed DDT properly when we didn't even know about the phenomenon of biomagnification until eagles began to disappear and scientists tracked it down? When atomic bombs were dropped on Japan in 1945, scientists didn't know there was a thing called radioactive fallout. That was discovered years later in atomic bomb tests over Bikini. We didn't know about the possibility of nuclear winter or electromagnetic pulses of gamma rays that knock out electrical circuits. All of these things we discovered after we opened up the nuclear genie. When CFCs began to be used by millions of pounds. CFCs are very large ring molecules with carbon and fluorine attached. And the value of CFCs is they're chemically inert. So if you put them in a spray can with perfume or whatever, the CFCs don't react with the molecules and break them down. So CFCs are great. We put them in refrigerators, in the refrigerants, we put them into spray cans, and only years later, we discovered that CFCs float up in the upper atmosphere, and way up there, ultraviolet light from the sun breaks chlorine off CFCs, and chlorine scavages ozone. When scientists began to report that CFCs were breaking down the ozone layer, my response was, I didn't know there was an ozone layer up there to break down. Then I discovered that ozone is one of the great protecting layers against the sun's rays. So over and over again, we think we're so smart. We find that we can make pesticides, or we can make atomic bombs, or we can create molecules like CFCs. Then we discover the world is very complex, and we can't predict the negative effects of our technologies. But that hasn't stopped us. We're going in to create intelligent machines through artificial intelligence. We're using nanotechnology to manipulate atoms and molecules. We're using genetic engineering to engineer the very code of life. We're creating geoengineering to try to engineer the atmosphere of the planet. Who the hell do we think we are? Do we think we're so smart we can do all of these new technologies without some kind of unexpected consequence? The impact of humankind now in the Anthropocene, is very obvious, beginning with the atmosphere. We've changed the chemistry of the atmosphere by adding so much carbon to the atmosphere, primarily by burning fossil fuels. And as we've changed the chemistry of the atmosphere, we've changed the property of the atmosphere in terms of its ability to absorb and retain radiation, that is infrared or heat. And so the altered chemistry has resulted in a greenhouse effect that scientists are concerned in terms of the consequences. As we've changed the chemistry of the atmosphere by adding more carbon, at the interface between the air and the oceans, which covers 70% of the planet, carbon dissolves into the oceans as carbonic acid. And so the pH of the oceans is changing. We're acidifying the oceans because we've changed the chemistry of the air. And we're already seeing that organisms that have evolved to live at a very constant pH are now suffering, especially shellfish, which can't build their shells around them, oysters, clams, and so on. So we're changing the chemistry of the atmosphere that changes the chemistry of the oceans. The oceans are a mess. We are destroying the most effective remover of carbon from the atmosphere, namely forests, by our logging practices. We're rapidly reducing the capacity of the atmosphere to reabsorb the carbon that we generate by burning fossil fuels. And so that's adding to the global warming crisis. We are using chemicals that are spread throughout the air, the water, and the soil, so that every one of you, including me, is filled with dozens of toxic chemicals. And I'm sure that you've been reading that things like these microplastic particles that are coming out off our makeup, that are coming out of the food that we cook, our frying pans, these micro pieces of plastic, we're ingesting, we're drinking it, we're eating it, we're plasticizing ourselves as well as the oceans and the soil, and we're driving species to extinction at an unprecedented rate. So adding all that up, humans, by virtue of the powerful position we've achieved, are now undermining the richness, the abundance, and the richness of the planet, and making it a much less livable place for all life on Earth. How on earth did we arrive at this moment in time? I'm a geneticist by training, and I've been amazed at how scientists can now use DNA, the genetic material, to track the movement of people over time. And when you follow the trails and follow them backwards, they all lead to Africa 150,000 years ago. Africa was where human beings were born as a species. And I keep waiting for the Ku Klux Klan to invite me to give a lecture so I can tell them, what the hell's your problem? We're all Africans, for God's sake. That was our birthplace. And that's where we flourished for tens of thousands of years. Now, when you try to imagine what Africa was like when we were born in the great savannas, they were filled with animals in abundance and variety beyond anything you would see in the Serengeti today. And if we went back in time, we'd have to look pretty hard to see little clusters of 3, 4, or 5 of these funny-looking, furless, two-legged apes. And that was us. We were this naked ape running around, and you gotta admit, we were not a very impressive animal. There weren't many of us. We weren't very big. We weren't very strong or fast. We didn't have great sensory ability. I keep trying to imagine swinging through the trees on a vine without glasses. Man, I'd hit a tree and fall down and get eaten up in no time. I mean, what the heck did we have going for us? I am sure when humans passed by other animals, they didn't all go to their children, shh, quiet now, don't piss them off. They're going to take over the planet. I mean, we were an unimpressive animal. Well, of course, the reason we were unimpressive is our secret was invisible. Our secret was that 1.5 kilogram organ hidden by our skulls. The human brain was the secret of our success. The human brain was a very complex structure. It made us very curious. We were very observant. We remembered. We have a memory beyond anything any other species has. We were creative. We were inventive. We tried things out and we learned by trial and error. And those were a really critical part of our success. And we did something no other animal has done. We invented an idea called the future. The future doesn't exist. The only thing that exists is now and what we can remember from the past. But because human beings invented the notion of a future, we realized we can affect the future by what we do now in the present. That is, based on what we observed and learned and experienced, we can look ahead. You know, of course, in the beginning it was very simple. You're walking down a path, the path branches, and you go, oh yeah, I went down to the right and I ran into a saber-toothed tiger. But when I went down to the left 6 months ago, I found something good to smoke or eat, you know, and so I'm going left. So that's what we did. Based on what we learned and observed, we made decisions that allowed us to avoid danger and exploit opportunity. I believe foresight, the ability to look ahead, was our great advantage. And look at what it did. By using foresight, we have got to a position of dominance on the planet. And today, we have scientists. We have supercomputers. And with scientists and supercomputers, our ability to look ahead is that much better. And for over 50 years now, the leading scientists of the world have been telling us we're heading down a very dangerous path, that there are opportunities that come from changing direction and going that way. Let me show you what they've been saying. Here's a remarkable document that was released. I'm sorry that this is such a wide shot, but the document is called World Scientists Warning to Humanity. And this was released in 1992. It was signed by more than 1,700 senior scientists, not just any old PhD. These are senior scientists from 71 countries in the world, including over half of all Nobel Prize winners alive in 1992. So you got to take this fairly seriously. Listen to what this document says. Human beings and the natural world are on a collision course. Human activities inflict harsh and often irreversible damage on the environment and on critical resources. If not checked, many of our current practices put at serious risk the future we wish for human society and the plant and animal kingdoms. Fundamental changes are urgent if we are to avoid the collision our present course will bring about. So there it is, a very strong warning that we are colliding with the life support systems. And then where are the collisions that are occurring? The very first thing is the atmosphere, water resources, oceans, soil, forests, species extinction, and overpopulation. And then the words grow even more bleak. Now this came out in 1992. No more than one or a few decades remain before the chance to avert the threats we now confront will be lost and the prospects for humanity immeasurably diminished. A great change in our stewardship of the earth and life on it is required if vast human misery is to be avoided and our global home on this planet is not to be irretrievably mutilated. And then it lists the 5 things that must be started altogether immediately. We must bring environmentally damaging activities under control to restore and protect the integrity of Earth's systems. 2, we must manage resources crucial to human welfare more critically. We must stabilize population. We must reduce and eventually eliminate poverty. And we must ensure sexual equality and guarantee women control over their own reproductive decisions. This is a terrifying document, but it was a warning that said we have to change directions and get off on a different path. There were scientists that were acting in the best tradition of our species, marshaling all the information we had, looking ahead, seeing where the dangers are and where the opportunities lie, and telling us what we must do. But we ignored it. We ignored it to the extent that in 2017, 25 years later, a world scientist warning to humanity a second warning was published, signed by more than 16,000 scientists, and that indicated every issue that was raised in this document, except one, the thinning ozone layer, every other issue has become worse, and there are new issues that weren't predicted at the time this document came out. So we are ignoring the very strategy for survival that got us to the place that we're at today. And the question is, why is this? I believe that what we are seeing is the consequence of a radical shift in the way that we see ourselves in the world. For most of human existence, we lived in what is called an ecocentric way of seeing the world. That is, we understood that we were a part of a very complex web and network of other species, of air, water, and soil. That was the world that we lived in. And we understood then that our very survival and well-being depended on the integrity of that web of living things. That's an ecocentric worldview. For 95% of our existence, we lived as nomadic hunter-gatherers. We carried everything that we owned on our backs, and we followed animals and plants through the seasons. When you live in that state, you know very well that your very existence and well-being depends on nature and her abundance and generosity. When you understand that, there is a powerful reciprocity then in our existence. We thank nature for the abundance and generosity, but we acknowledge we have a responsibility to continue to support nature so she can continue to be generous. Even after the agricultural revolution that took place in the last 5% of human existence, began 10,000 years ago. And we've been farmers for most of those 10,000 years. We understood as farmers that weather, climate, the seasons are utterly important for how and whether we survive. Farmers understand that insects are critical for pollination. They know that there are plants that will take nitrogen from the air and fix it as fertilizer in the soil. Farmers know the amount of snow in the winter directly related to the moisture in the soil in the summer. Farmers understand an ecocentric way of seeing the world. But a big shift began to happen, and I believe the big stimulus began around 500 years ago, when Europeans discovered ways of being able to sail over great distances and come back home again. They could now begin to search the world for opportunity or resources. So the great age of exploration then enabled Europeans to discover new lands. Well, of course, when they discovered new lands from Africa to North and South America, Australia, New Zealand, there were already people there. They didn't discover anything. They simply themselves found lands occupied by people who had lived in those places for thousands of years. But we didn't value the indigenous knowledge that enabled people to live in those places for as long as they did. Instead, we wanted the opportunities, the resources. And this was a resourcist attitude. The trees, the animals, the minerals, those were all huge opportunities that allowed the explorers to take them and take them back to their home countries. And so you get the spread of the idea that everywhere you can see things useful to human beings, and our resourcist approach was those are opportunities to gain wealth. And the indigenous people became, and up to this day, are regarded as a real pain in the butt. They don't want us to get what we want. They were an impediment to us to exploit the lands that the indigenous people have occupied for thousands of years. And so we've tried to genocidal policies, we've tried to pen them in tiny reserves, we've tried to make them over to become like us, because we want what their lands hold. About 200 years ago, you get the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. And this marked a really big change in our attitude, because suddenly we could create technology, we could create machines that would allow us to go beyond the biological constraints of other living organisms. We could create telescopes that enable us to see to the edge of the universe. We could invent microscopes that allow you to see a world of life in a drop of water. We could make machines that would work tirelessly 24 hours a day, or machines that could travel faster than any species of life on Earth. And so it became easy to think humans have escaped the laws of nature. We're so smart, we just have to be smart enough to invent ways of exceeding natural boundaries. And so it was natural then for us to acquire an anthropocentric way of seeing the world. In an anthropocentric way, we're at the center of the action, and everything is about us. Everything out there is for us. We just have to be able to use that stuff more carefully and wisely. And so an anthropocentrism results in the creation of systems that are basically built around us. Our entire legal system is built around defining property, that is defining human rights. But wait a minute now, with that kind of an approach, what about the right of a river to flow as it must? What about the right of a forest to exist as a community of organisms? Or what about the right of a songbird to live out its life as it evolved to do? Who the hell do we think we are that we can go and define whether or not all the rest of nature has rights, and those rights, we're going to set those rights ourselves? This is, I think, one of the fundamental difficulties with the whole legal system, and I see us over and over again trying to use the legal system to achieve environmental ends. We fought against a dam that was going to be built at Site C on the Peace River 40 years ago, and we stopped it. And now the government of British Columbia is building the dam that we stopped using legal means back 40 years ago. We worked, my foundation and I and my wife worked together with the Kayapo in the 1990s and stopped a major dam that was going to be built on the Xingu River, and that was going to be the first of 200 dams in the Amazon river system. We stopped that in 1992. But guess what? Brazil is going ahead, and that dam is already half built. Over and over again, we fight using legal means to achieve an immediate victory, but the victory is pyrrhic. It's not permanent, because the legal system is about humans. It's not about the ecological systems that we're fighting to protect. So over and over again, we end up fighting the same battles, because the legal system is fixed. It's fixed against nature. And then, you know, today, I mean, listen to all of the rhetoric surrounding the lead up to the election on Monday. It's all about the economy. The economy is everything. Even if you talk about climate change, it's how are we going to pay to be able to shift our energy. And this economy that we bowed down before is so defective that the economy itself is responsible for our destructive, ecologically destructive nature. First of all, the economy is built or designed on the principle of cancer cells. That's crazy. Cancer cells in your body think that they can divide forever. You know that can't happen. and that cancer will eventually kill you if you don't stop it. But economists think they're so smart, we're not bound by the boundaries of nature. We can now create a system, the economy, that can grow forever. Indeed, the very definition of success or progress in the economy is by growth. You define progress by whether or not the economy grew. And you can't grow an economy forever. But if you're built on the principle of growth, we never ask the question, how much is enough? What is an economy for? Are there no limits? You're damn right there are limits, and we're way beyond enough with our economic system. And right there, I'm delighted to be able to address a group of students. I am sure some of you are going into commerce or you're taking courses in economics. Don't tell me the university is serious about sustainability if it hasn't come to a simple question of limits to growth. You talk to anybody in universities, their whole programs are built on what? The idea they're going to continue to grow. This is nuts. Universities are way too big already, but they don't talk about limits to growth. So growth has become the very property that we think is the definition of success and that can be maintained indefinitely. Now, how much time do I have? Can I go on? Where is the chair? Can I go on for a while longer?
Continue.
Okay. Well, many years ago, I was asked by the Nalaka people in the interior of British Columbia to help them because their valley, the Stein Valley, is considered sacred to the Nalaka people. But the British Columbia government had given a logging permit to a forest company, Fletcher Challenge, which is a New Zealand forest company. So BC had said to Fletcher Challenge, you can go ahead and log this forest. And the Nalaka people said, no, we don't want any trees cut down in there. So I joined their battle, and by accident, I ran into the CEO of Fletcher Challenge. I didn't know who he was. He didn't know who I was. But as we introduced ourselves and began to chat, I realized, oh my God, this is the CEO of Fletcher Challenge. And he eventually realized, oh my God, this is that shit disturber, David Suzuki. And so, needless to say, what began as, oh, hello, how are you, escalated until we were screaming at each other. And he said, listen, Suzuki, there are this many board feet of lumber in the Stein Valley. There are this many cubic meters of pulp. There are this many jobs, there's this much money. What do you have to offer? Are tree huggers like you willing to pay for those trees? Because if you're not willing to pay for them, they don't have any value till someone cuts them down. And that to me was an epiphany, because I realized he was absolutely right. Because as long as we have to argue in economic terms, we are doomed. The reason I was joining the Nalaka people was that forest is performing services that keep the planet healthy and habitable for us. All of the green things are taking carbon dioxide out of the air and letting oxygen back in through photosynthesis. If all the green things in the oceans and on land weren't photosynthesizing, you and I would not be here. Oxygen is a very reactive element. When oxygen is released, it immediately rusts iron, it oxidizes things, it disappears. It's only because there are so many plants in the oceans and on land that we can continue to produce enough oxygen to maintain the 19 to 20% oxygen in the atmosphere. If you cut down the forest and you lose the photosynthetic activity, and you say to an economist, well, what about that? What about the cost? You know what they say? There must be some economists in the audience there. What do economists say when you lose that photosynthetic activity? It's an externality. It's not relevant to the economy. So this is just collateral damage. Gee, we're sorry, guys, we've lost that important function, but sorry, the economy is based on human creativity and productivity. The forest, what it's doing, all of the all of the services it's performed to keep the planet healthy are considered irrelevant to our economic system. My answer to that is WTF. You guys get Nobel Prizes for this insane system? What the hell is going on? And then I said to the CEO of the forest company, where in this economy is there a factor for what is sacred? That to the Nalcopowics people, that forest is sacred. So put that in your economy and tell me then that it's worth logging that forest. The economy doesn't have a place for what is sacred. The economy doesn't have a place for nature services that keep the planet healthy. So this is a nutty system, and yet listen to the rhetoric that's going on around climate change and the cost of doing something to reduce the risk of climate change. Finally, we've set up political systems to manage the way we deal with each other, our behavior. And yeah, when we have a democracy like Canada claims, we have a Minister of the Environment, we have a Minister of Fisheries and Oceans, we have Ministers of Forests, we have Ministers of Agriculture. But do you think their primary job is to protect the environment, is to protect the oceans, to protect the fish, to protect the forests or the soil? Hell no, those things don't vote. That's not a politician's job. A politician is to serve the people that vote for them. So if all of those things don't vote, he's or she is caring about the people that want to use those things. So, you know, and you see it in spades over and over again. I have spent so many years lobbying environmental ministers over and over again. They can't do anything because their service is not to the things that environmentalists are fighting for. So the reality is we're going right down the chute. Let me show you how Canada has responded to what is now clearly the existential threat for all of human beings on the planet. In 1988, a major conference of climatologists was held in Toronto. Brian Mulroney was Prime Minister. He asked Stephen Lewis, who had been the leader of the NDP in Ontario, to chair some of the sessions because Stephen Lewis was then a United Nations delegate for Canada. Stephen Lewis chaired the first big conference on global warming in Toronto. The first person to speak at that conference was Brian Mulroney, the Prime Minister of Canada. The second person to speak was Gro Harlem Brundtland, the Prime Minister of Norway, who released the Brundtland Report for the United Nations in 1987. The third person to speak was a climatologist named James Hansen. And Hansen had electrified Congress weeks before he came to Toronto by saying that the heat wave that the United States was going through in 1988, scientists were 99% sure that it was caused by human use of fossil fuels. And that's what he said in Toronto. So the scientists at that meeting were so alarmed. They said the science is in, global warming represents a threat second only to all-out nuclear war. And they called for a 20% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions in 15 years. If they had done it, if humanity had taken the scientists' warning seriously and had acted on it, we wouldn't have the problem of climate change today. We would be well on our way to an alternate energy future. But Canada didn't do, nor did any other country, do anything. By 1992, only 4 years later, George H.W. Bush said, he was an oil guy, remember, I'm not going to go to Rio to the gathering of heads of state unless you water down that target on global warming. And so they wanted to get George Bush to attend the largest gathering of heads of state ever in human history to that point. They watered it down to, we will stabilize 1990 levels of emissions by the year 2000. So they watered it down. Canada signed, so did the United States, signed the agreement at Rio, but we didn't do it. Then in 1997, the world met at Kyoto. And there, the industrialized countries said, we created the problem, we're responsible, we're going to get our act together, we're going to cap our emissions and reduce our emissions by 5 to 6% below 1990 levels by 2012. And then in 2012, all of the other countries of the world would come into the agreement. We didn't do any, we ratified Kyoto in 2002, but when Stephen Harper became Prime Minister, he made Canada the only country that signed Kyoto to pull out of the Kyoto Accord. So there you have it. In 2015, we had Justin Trudeau went to Paris, said Canada's back, signed the Paris Agreement to try to keep temperature from rising more than 2 degrees, but preferably 1.5 degrees by the end of this century. And he said, we've got to aim at 1.5. We all celebrated. And then he came back to Canada and bought a pipeline and said, we have to expand the tar sands. We need the revenue to begin to reduce our emissions. So there you have it. We have a political, economic, and legal system that is fixed. It's fixed against us doing the right things. And so what has happened then? Canada has never met a target that we've signed to agree to. It's taken a 16-year-old child to tell us, don't listen to me. Please listen to what the scientists are saying. Please act on the scientists. Because the scientists are saying, if we continue as we are, then children like her, Greta Thunberg, do not have a future. In October last year, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, a very conservative group of climatologists, said if we don't keep temperature below 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial levels, if we don't keep temperature below 1.5 degrees, then all hell breaks loose, and we're currently on a trajectory for 4 to 6 degrees rise. We've got to keep it below 1.5, and in order to meet that target, they said we have to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 45% by 2030 and 100% by 2050. So they gave us 12 years to basically reduce emissions by 50%. We've already used up one of those years, and we're still, the emissions continue to arise. One day after that report came out, and I'm telling you, it was a terrifying report, because all indications are, as I said, we're on our way to 4 to 6 degree rise by the end of this century. One day later, Canada declared marijuana was legal. And all discussion about that report, the IPCC report, disappeared from the media. So this terrifying report about climate change was a one-day wonder in the media. In May of this year, the United Nations released a document that was the most extensive look at biodiversity on the planet. And what this document concluded was that we are going through a mega extinction phase where more than 200 species are disappearing every day, that up to 1 million species of plants and animals are on the brink of extinction. One day later, Harry and Meghan had a baby. And the only thing that went extinct was the report on extinction in the media. What the hell is going on? Our great boast is that we are intelligent. And yet we are not paying attention to the very survival strategy of our species. Listen to what our experts tell us. Look ahead, see where the opportunities lie, and move on it. So, in the name of the economy, in the service of corporations, in the limitations of our political sphere, we are heading straight towards the loss of a future for our children and grandchildren. Last month, millions of people marched around the world to try to bring some climate sanity to leaders around the world. How many times have you heard in the debates, in the discussions of our so-called leaders asking us to vote? How many of them have said, look, we hear it. We've heard the hundreds of thousands of Canadians that marched last month. We are committed to reducing our emissions starting today. We've got to begin the big reductions. How many of you have heard any politician or candidate for office say that? This is a terrifying moment in time. Thank you.
Thank you, David. We will open up. I hope you have some time for some questions from here.
Sure.
Yeah. So anybody want to ask, come to the mic here and ask. Yeah. Please go to the mic.
Hi, David. Can you hear me?
I can.
Hi, my name is Ian Lipton. David, are you optimistic?
Optimistic about what?
The future.
I am neither an optimist nor a pessimist. I'm a realist. I know where we're headed, and I know our track record. I'm citing our track record. But I also know it is possible to get radical change. We need a revolution. We can't go on the way we're going now. We simply cannot. We've got to act as if we are at war. When you're at war, when Japan attacked Pearl Harbor and Roosevelt said we're at war, you didn't hear Republicans say, oh Christ, our economy's going to go into the sewer. How are we going to pay for this? Everybody said, we got to win this war. You know, but we've got a war room in Alberta. Jason Kenney is right. We should be at war. The problem with Jason, he's got the guns aimed the wrong way. But we need to have everybody, and my message is, it's crazy to act as if, well, the climate change, that's the issue for the Green Party. The other parties are looking at other things. We need every party to say, this is our #1 priority, and we've got to work together. And I tell people, you know, when the Raptors were in the final playoffs, I couldn't believe what happened in Canada. Montrealers hate the Toronto Maple Leafs, but Montreal had a Jurassic Park rooting for Toronto Raptors. That's what we need, is all Canadians to come together like that and realize, yes, Alberta is the energy heart of Canada, and we've got to look to Alberta for leadership towards the energy of the future. We've got to help all of those experts of getting energy out of the tar sands. They've got skills. Let's help them convert to the new energy of the 21st century. That's what we've got to work together at. We're not fighting Alberta. They're not our enemy. We've got to help them out, and Alberta's got to realize what they're doing has enormous consequences for the rest of Canada. We've got a stake in that, but let's all work together rather than fighting each other to maintain a few more drops of money into the economy.
David, I just want to say one more thing. I gave a talk today, a lecture here on an area of focus that I have, and my whole thesis is that the very mechanism that has led to our evolutionary success as a species is exactly what's causing our evolutionary demise.
And what is that?
That is our evolutionary relationship to perceived threat. We don't get the threat of climate catastrophe because it's not in front of us. The threats the threats that our brain, that our amygdala are constantly responding to are threats to our identity, to our status, to our reputation. These are not real existential threats, but the amygdala cannot differentiate between the two. And
I don't buy the biological determinism like that. It's a way of just saying, look, there's nothing that can be done. It's built into it. I don't buy that.
I'm not saying there's nothing that can be done. I'm saying this is the access to the transformation of ourselves by coming to this recognition, this self-inquiry, and recognizing ourselves that the threat is not real, that the other threat.
I don't think that's the challenge. The problem is the way we see our place in the world. Our values, our beliefs are what shape the way we respond. Ask a woman and ask a man to talk about love or marriage or sex, and you think, holy cow, it's amazing we ever get together. They're very different. Ask a guy on Skid Row who's on welfare and a currency speculator about the economy, about welfare, about money. You'll get radically different responses, right? Ask an Israeli or an Israeli Jew and an Israeli Palestinian about the Gaza or whatever. We see the world through values and beliefs that are shaped by gender, by ethnicity, by socioeconomic, all those things that shape. And I believe the big shift has been the change from ecocentrism to anthropocentrism. And that's, when you live in a state of nature and understand you're utterly dependent on nature, then, and talk to any indigenous person, reciprocity is built into the way they live because they know that everything they do has consequences. And so there's responsibility. You want to know what I think is the heart of our drive right now? It's the economy. It's capitalism. Capitalism is responsible so that you get corporations now. Our governments run on a corporate agenda because the corporations are paying for people to run for office. And you ask, the corporations, Exxon, for God's sake, Exxon, their own scientists were saying in the 1970s that burning fossil fuels is causing global warming. In 1965, Frank Eichard, the president of the American Petroleum Institute, gave a public speech in which he said, fossil fuels are causing the planet to heat up, and if we don't do something by the year 2000, it's going to be beyond our control. 1965, the oil industry knew damn well, but in the name of profit, they chose to use the same technique the tobacco industry did, to deny for decades that smoking causes cancer, and the tobacco industry today is supporting all of the fight against any regulations on vaping. They're not, these corporate, when is a corporate, we talk about corporate social responsibility. That is simply an oxymoron. You can't have a social responsibility if your whole purpose for existing is to make money. And that's the problem. We've got to rein in the corporate sector. And then the enormous inequities of wealth. When a dozen people own the wealth of over half of the rest of the planet, there is something so obscene about this, and these people are lobbying like mad to get government off their back, to stop regulations, to reduce taxes. Like, what the hell? That's the challenge. It's not the amygdala or whatever you say. It's what we created from the amygdala.
Okay, I think we agree. We agree.
Okay, next one.
I'm Sarah.
Sorry, you'll have to speak more directly into the mic.
My
Pull
name
it down.
Sarah.
Pull it down. There you
I can only see myself right now, but
I can see
I'll
you.
just ask you this question because I'm not really sure how to formulate this question, but just hearing about the statistics and the obscene fact that our population is growing so quickly, I'm wondering what your thoughts are in terms of just addressing the potential impermanence of us as a species, and also like talking is great, but I feel like every day I live beyond my means just in terms of being in a rich country and just, you know, day-to-day stuff. So like as an individual, I feel like what should we do other than have these conversations? And I'm also wondering about like even having kids.
Yeah, well, it's a very tough time because the reality is we are anticipating the extinction of our species, not within my lifetime, but within yours. If I live another 10 years, I will be very, very lucky. I don't expect to. But within your lifetimes, before you're middle-aged, scientists are already saying we're going to be gone. Now, extinction is natural. Extinction is necessary for evolution to take place. 99.9999% of all species that have ever existed are extinct. The average length of time, though, for a species is 1 to 2 million years. Extinction is what allows us to adapt as the world conditions change. But we are an infant species. We've been around for 150,000 years. And yet I'm now looking to my grandchildren and saying, I don't think they have a chance. They certainly don't have a chance for the kind of life I had. Now, some young women are saying they're making a commitment not to have children unless we're able to turn that corner. And that's an indication of how desperate people feel, that it's a very real issue that confronts them. My daughter, who gave a speech in 1992 in Rio when she was 12, for which she's known by a lot of people, when she called me to say, Dad, I'm pregnant, I said, Sev, you know, you've been an environmentalist, you know what kind of a world we're heading for, and you still want to have a child. And her answer blew me away. She said, yes, I've always worried about heading for the chaos. But she said, my child is my commitment to Mother Earth. I will have a child and fight with all my might to save the world for my children. And that, I think, is as powerful an answer, okay? You've all got to grapple with that question. We're heading for a very difficult time. But I think the important thing is that we try. You know, you've got to do the best you can and hope there are enough people to do. So to me, the most important thing for you right now and everybody else in this room is get the hell out and vote. And because your group is notoriously the lowest turnout for elections. You can't afford to do that. Get out and vote and demand of the people that are running that you're going to vote for, that climate is their highest priority. We need all the parties to have climate as their number. So that's number one. You've got to recruit mom and dad who should be doing that job. They've got to get out there and vote. Number two, though, is that there are ways that we have to begin to change our life. My hope is after the election, environmental groups are going to go out to grassroots and tell all of you, look, we want you to try to reduce your energy use in a year by 25%. In Japan, after Fukushima, the Japanese people, without any legislation, reduced their energy use by more than 20% and have kept that reduction for over 5 years. So I know the public is ready. They want to do something, but they want to know, how can I make that reduction? And we have to make really, the big changes have to come from government. Government has to legislate reductions in our emissions, period. We have to set targets and meet them. Now, where you individually, I think the biggest impact that we're having as young people is consumption. And that consumption is fashions. It just pisses me off to see the fashion industry. It used to be that they had an annual presentation of fashions, and that was a big thing. Dior and all these guys strutted out their new lines of clothing. Then they said, oh, well, we've got to have 4 fashion shows, 1 for each season. And then it became, we're having a fashion show every month. They have new fashions coming in every week now. Why? Because they need you to keep buying stuff over and over again and throwing away your old. Stella McCartney is very outspoken about the destructiveness of the fashion industry. Now, for me, the thing that is so stunning is that we were very poor after World War II. And so I grew up all my life wearing blue jeans because denim wears like iron. When young people go out and spend hundreds of dollars to buy blue jeans that are already ripped, what the hell is that telling you about what kind of an animal we are? Every time I confront someone walking down with all these tears in their blue jeans, it's like saying, go away, I don't give a shit about the earth, I try to look good and I'm gonna throw this away. There is lots of opportunity. Buy all your clothing secondhand as the beginning of things. But we've got to get off this destructive path we're on.
May I ask, because you talked about politics being fixed, so, but then our solution is to vote. So
we need big changes, and the only way we're going to do that is when we elect governments who say, we're at war. We're at war with emissions. And once that happens, and there's a very good book coming out by an environmentalist that talks about what Canada did during the war. And if you look at what we did, it's absolutely astounding. Canada went to war, and women suddenly became a resource to go in and man or staff the factories, and they became a huge part of the economy. Jobs were created. They set up 28, I don't know what you call them, but the government set up these 28 different institutions. By the end of the war, Canada was pumping out hundreds of tanks every week. They were pumping out hundreds of airplanes every month. They were pumping out dozens of battleships every month. I mean, the economy benefited tremendously, but Canada's response was the kind of response that we need to climate change. Stop thinking about how are we going to pay for this. We've got no choice, because the future of young people is now being held up in the bargain.
thank you.
Namaste. Thank you so much for your words. My name is Kayla Amalides.
You're going to have to speak up.
Okay, can you hear me now?
I can.
To carry on with the conversation, we're at war and we need a revolution. Great. We know that the government is already tracking these words at rates and doing what they need to do to make sure that that rhetoric, that language is not continuing. So here we are in the framework of University of Toronto. Again, I'm going to go to my professor, my guru, one that I respect dearly, on Monday, and we're going to go, what, Shashi, are we doing this? Is there a revolution happening now? Are we at war? I'm with you, and many young people feel this and know this, and we know that that there are things happening, but how can you please give me some ideas as to what are practical things we can do at the rate that we have to do them within the context of the universities, or do we actually have to say, no, this isn't the place it's going to happen and we're going to go somewhere else?
I certainly don't think the universities now are the place that are going to show leadership on this whole issue. Stephen Harper, I hope most of you know who Stephen Harper is, although kids today don't seem to have a very long sense of history. I'm sorry, but my experience is the vast majority of kids your age don't know who Stephen Harper is. That's the reality. Stephen Harper is one of the great gifts to Canada, a wonderful man. He and I went across Canada trying to get university students to realize that climate is the issue of greatest importance to them and to get them to come out and begin to vote. That was our whole message. I wrote to the presidents of 6 universities and said, Stephen Harper and Stephen Lewis, sorry. Did I say Stephen Harper? Oh my God, please forgive me. I'm an atheist. God, please forgive me for that. Stephen Lewis and I set out. And I wrote to 6 university presidents and said, Stephen Lewis and I are coming to your campus for free. Will you sponsor our presence there? Every single university president turned us down. They did not want to be official sponsors of free speeches to the students of their university. McGill and one other university turned us down flat. The other universities went, well, maybe we can find other ways to do this. They were worried because they're all worried about losing money that might come from funders that might object to people like Stephen and me coming. So what the hell is a university if it's not the place to explore ideas like this? If most countries of the world, revolutions start at university campuses. They're not going to start in Canadian university campuses. But despite that, students are going to universities. You can create something out of that. You want to know what I think we've got? We've seen marches, unbelievable marches. I marched in Montreal, 500,000 people. And yet 3 days later, the media acted as if, oh, that was last week's old stale news. So what the hell does it take? We've got to keep marching. There's another march being scheduled for November. But I think when it becomes clear in the next Parliament, and it will happen very quickly, that they're not going to take reducing emissions as their highest priority, that will become clear. It'll all be about carbon taxes and pipelines and all that stuff. Then I think that we've got to have a march on Ottawa, that elders like me with nothing to lose have got to take over the parliamentary buildings and get arrested doing it. And students and young people have got to enter Parliament and hold a mock parliamentary system and begin to pass laws that are designed to protect the future for young people. That's what we've got to do.
Let me know what day and time.
Revolutions with violence are going to mean lots of people, the innocent people, are going to get killed. I believe we need a revolution, but it must not be a violent revolution. And that to me has been the amazing thing about Greta. When I met Greta, all I could say to her was, I'm sorry. My generation, the boomers, we fucked this planet over until it finally you had to come and tell us. You know, that's the job of parents. We've left this terrible state. But Greta has given youth a tremendous power. And I think they're going to have to drive this change. But it must not be violent.
Okay, David, so in the interest of time, we will stop questions here, but I want to let you know that we have a program here, Masters of Science and Sustainability Management, and I want to take your 5 minutes. Two students of that program, one alumni and one student, current student, they want to say something to you and to all audience here. So Jay and Kayla want to come here. And
Sincere gratitude for this opportunity. and for this moment. For all those who sang songs and offered prayers, offered their beings, who died for Earth, and for the people that they love so dearly. It is a deep, deep honor and responsibility to them and to the children who will be coming before us that we offer this song.
It's been a long time coming. It's been oh so long. It's been a long time coming. Rachel Carson's fable for tomorrow is our today. The planet is getting hotter and hotter. The ocean is higher, ground drier, life dire. Places, spaces, everywhere, 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 human traces. More and more and more and more and more erases. But wait, wait, wait. You all know this. It is the narrative told time and time again. So we shall start this story, our story, with the words, and then people realized communities, 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 so much more important than commodities. Families, love, devotion, a notion, a universal emotion. It is not what divides us that makes us strong. What unites us is a chorus song all along, and then we learned to belong to the planet, to each other.
What do you value?
Intergenerational equity, education, poverty, reasons for authority to move from minority to majority. And then we imagined an economy of circularity, Earth, a rarity, the path to coexistence and prosperity. And then, it is all unwritten, let's be frank. Those pages of tomorrow and the next, they are blank. Oh yes, we can have hopeful visions. We can sit in chairs and continue with indecisions. We can do the least that is asked of us, thus continue to discuss and discuss and discuss and discuss the necessary changes, only superfluous. But that is not what we see in these faces before us. Do not throw away your potential. These minds, these perceptions, capable of so much more. It is our responsibility, your responsibility, together to no longer ignore. We stand before you, our dear friends, and ask you to be part of a renaissance. We stand before you, our teachers, and ask you to be part of a renaissance. Be leaders of change, break ceilings, fight discrimination and unjust legislation. Fight the extermination that comes with economic globalization. We dare you, we dare you, we dare you to be an aberration. Speak for those without a voice or those who have been silenced. Defiance to this extractive compliance. There are so many problems. It is easy to avoid, but it is unpopular solutions that change institutions, distributions, and result in revolutions. So here is what we hope for you. We hope you continue to imagine. We hope you listen to others with empathy and compassion. Evolve your lenses to the consequences of defenses based only on monetary expenses. We hope you find great love in your life. someone who will cherish you, someone you can learn from, someone who will inspire, because you will require a person who will open the door, because you are the change, you are the change, you are the change the world is asking for. Sisyphus pushes the rock of change only for it to fall back again. Sisyphus pushes the rock of change only for it to fall back again. But keep climbing, find meaning beyond the double speak that's deceiving. For in the end, to quote another friend, it's been a long time coming. It's been oh so long. It's been a long time coming. Change is gonna come.
Thank you, Jen and Kayla. David?
Yes.
So that is a sample of some of belief systems of the students in MScSM program. I want to thank you for your not only talk today, inspiring talk, and your commitment and commitment to the welfare of society, welfare of the planet, and what you have been doing throughout your life. Next time, if you want to talk to a student, please contact me. We will welcome you here at any time, and we will talk to the student who have a definitely the commitment from inside, different value system, and they want to change this world. So I believe, David, you will be here in Toronto in November sometime. So without any additional carbon footprint, if you have some time, we will welcome you to MScSM program, and we will organize face talk with them. Program different in my view. If anything will happen anytime, it will happen from only some place in universities. Revolutions start from universities, from academic institutions, and they should start from there, because that is the role of universities. That's not the role of societies. And universities, as you said earlier, definitely they are not training people to do that, but we are welcoming those type of students to come to our program. We teach in our program love, respect, reciprocity, which you will not hear normally in management program or economics program. We also teach our people about the limits. We also teach our people that externalities are to market, they are not to society. They are internal affairs of the society. That way, the program is quite different, and maybe we are walking on a path which you want to promote, and maybe you can walk on that path together. So thank you very much for your talk, and thank you very much for inspiration. And
thank you.
thank you so much. So we will be in touch by email and then see where we end up next together. Thank you, David.